Welcome back to Just Another Solar Podcast with Luke Beattie, that's me, and joined today by co-hosts Karl, Jensen and Dougal Gillman.
Hey, Dougal.
Hey, Karl. How you going? Nice to get an invite again.
I was hoping that Luke could get a bit more out of you last week with Andy, but you graciously let Andy take the limelight, so we had to have you back.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And the last fortnight, it's been something of biblical proportions. We've had floods, wars, famines. Today, it'll be good to discuss, number one, the huge impact of the floods and what that looks like for our industry, and also the other major topic, which is the Ukrainian war, and also how that may have an impact on our industry, be it through supply chain or a few other issues. So we're going to cover off some of that stuff today. So first, we'll start with the floods, though. We just want to mention that for any listeners out there who've been personally affected, our thoughts go out to you. Speaking to companies across the East Coast, Queensland and New South Wales, a lot of people have been impacted either directly or they have family or friends who have been impacted. So have you heard similar things, guys?
Yeah, I have, Luke. I think there's a lot of customers that have reached out and they've experienced a lot of damage. Some of them have been completely wiped out. Stock that may have been sitting on the bottom of a warehouse, that warehouse went under, water went up to, it went high. There's a lot of damage out there.
Yeah, it's all rather heartbreaking. The Lismore's been pretty much wiped off the map. I don't know how anyone can build back there after second time in as many years. The damage is just heartbreaking.
And one of the images I found really striking was of the Sunshine Coast Solar Farm. So that was covered with water, and the developers of the project said that when they built that, they built it based on a 1 in 100-year flood event. Now, they've said that this is a 1 in 500-year flood event, but it seems to be the second such flood we've had in recent years.
Yeah, the amazing part of that one was that at least part of it's up and running straight away. So when you think about critical infrastructure or any kind of infrastructure that you can go in, make repairs like throw away a couple of inverters, replace them with new ones, and you're back up and running within a day, I'm calling that good. In comparison with other things, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty remarkable. And solar panels IP67 generally, which is submersed into water up to a metre for like half an hour. I reckon you could probably push the envelope a bit there, and if that'll raise back up and running, it might be a good testament, a good case study for someone to do just to see how we deal with this in the future.
So that's an interesting point. I saw Jake Warner from Sydney, and he posted a video online saying to people who are being evacuated that they can turn off the main solar switch and a few things they can do to protect the system more than what it would be. What does it look like when someone comes home or a business comes back and their system's been completely flooded?
We saw a couple of those pictures. So typically blows the cover off the inverter, and that's because you've got positive and negative coming down from the array. So you turn the inverter shell into an electrolyzer. One part makes hydrogen, the other part makes oxygen, and then you get an ignition source from a little bit of a spark and boof, up she goes.
So we're expecting to see a lot of insurance jobs for solar systems?
I'd say so. Dougal's probably across the insurance numbers. He's a numbers guy, but our industry is not going to see meaningful rollout of repaired stuff until all the other essentials are worked out. I don't think it's going to be particularly high on anyone's priority list.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And the other real question is how much of it is actually insurable. And there are tales out there that insurance companies are just simply not covering this sort of flood in that particular region because of the history of it. I did also read that the top 3 Australian insurance companies have had their entire 2022 disaster budget wiped out. It's the 12th of March. So there's not a lot of money in the pot for those insurance companies to pay. And, well, they just have to dive deeper into their pockets, I guess. And as Karl said, if your whole home's been flooded, your solar array is probably one of the later things you're thinking about.
So the insurer IAG said that they're expecting a 21% increase in flood damage claims if there's a 2 degrees Celsius increase in the pre-industrial age figures. So
I heard it was double for every degree in terms of natural disasters. We're doubling the frequencies of the natural disasters every degree we go up.
Yeah.
And do we need to adjust what a 1 in 100-year event and 1 in 500-year event looks like?
Yes, I think we do. I think, we're at we all work in an industry that's trying to mitigate climate change, right? We're fighting the source by putting up renewable energy, but we need to probably also start thinking as a country around what we can do to mitigate the effects of climate change and how we build our cities and where we build our cities. But yeah, there's a few challenges around that aspect of it. You build back better, but if you can't insure us in a different place, mate, it's heartbreaking just to see a whole community have to move. But if it's going to be happening every couple of years, then how tenable is it for an insurance company to continue to honour insurance on that? Like they won't.
Do you think there's considerations for installers as well, installing in flood-prone areas where they're not relocating communities, or is it just something that you install as per the standards?
That's a good question, and I think installing to the standards is fair enough and really all you could ask of an installer. And the question would then be, should the standards be rewritten? And that's a whole topic I don't want to go near, because standards always are pretty angry, and make it harder for everyone. We don't want that. Maybe. Karl, what do you reckon?
I reckon little Beattie told me that there's lots of, obviously different ideas as to what we need to do to stay under 1.5 degrees, which was a magic number for whatever reason, and that we needed to have 1,000 gigawatts of solar panel production online by 2025. Now, we went from 100 gigawatts to 200 gigawatts while we were in lockdown over COVID. The Chinese managed to continue to press on, and there's about $500 million worth of investment for every gigawatt of solar that we bring on. So the Chinese have invested $50 billion in a year, which is utterly spectacular. But Dougal and I had a coffee on Friday, and some of the presentations are pretty disheartening, because it looks a lot like we're falling well short.
Yeah, those presentations can be pretty disheartening. We've got to do an awful lot. But I look at the curve and the steepness of the incline and how quickly solar PV is being installed. And as Karl mentioned, you go back just 10 years and the installed capacity of new PV production, the panels that we can produce, was tiny compared to where it is now. We're at 773 gigawatts. That's a lot of installed capacity. A lot of production capacity. So there's still the ability to make sufficient PV to get us there, and we can't get disheartened otherwise. Well,
indeed, the economics are still good, even with the cost of panels going up. We highlighted in a previous episode the main reasons for the increase in cost, and those reasons haven't gone away. And in fact, in the current climate, there's a good chance that it's going to get worse. So we may well see further increases in module costs. If we're talking about coal, Russia exports a lot of coal to China, and if Chinese do say they stop taking coal from Russia, then we have another energy crisis.
I think it's pretty unlikely on that front for geopolitical
unlikely
reasons. But it's interesting, PV Tech said that the module space is going to be a seller's game for the next 2 years. They said even with the increased production capacities and all that sort of thing, the pricing will probably have an uptick over the next 2 years. So they'll forecast in. Now, looking at Q2 panel pricing, as far as I can see, it's pretty stable compared to where we're at. But obviously there's the variabilities of foreign exchange and also shipping costs, which last year were hitting record highs, and the reliability of the shipping lines was at record lows. And I saw a report, which I forwarded to you, Karl, yesterday, which suggested that this year could be even worse than last year for reliability of containers.
Yeah, look, I also note that Europe runs on Russian gas over winter, and we're turning the tap off. So they don't want to support Russia. They don't want to feed that money into the Russian economy. So I predict that the solar market, if I was Germany, if I was all these countries that use lots of gas in winter, I'd be banging in as much PV as I possibly can. And they can turn on those subsidies and make that happen pretty quickly. But I think generally the population will be prepared to make those investments themselves. And I think we'll see a record year in terms of installations in Europe.
I second that, Karl. I think that the opportunity here for Europe to divest itself from Russian gas is too good to turn up. I mean, we've seen that there's sufficient PV capacity for it to happen. It just needs the political will and the capital to then make it happen. And a couple of days ago, Germany announced an additional 200 billion euros in funding. And
but they are the largest importer of Russian gas. So I pulled out the list before. So 6 out of the top 10 are European countries, and Germany sits at the top. So you could argue that midterm, long term, there's going to be an enormous demand for solar and batteries and other sources. But short term, there's a pretty big gap to fill there. And we're seeing it in the gas prices and energy prices across the board. Oil's gone up enormously with the sanctions on Russian oil. Gas has spiked enormously. It's a good thing that we're going to change the energy mix, the carbon offsets, but in the very short term, it looks like there's an energy crisis in Europe.
Global, I would actually say, Luke. I don't think it's just in Europe. I think it's the whole world that's impacted by this energy crisis, and it's going to have flow-on effects well beyond the Bowser.
Yeah, so the Bowser here in Victoria, it's $2.25 a litre for regular unleaded. There's still a couple around at $1.85. I spoke to one of my neighbours, and he has family in the UK, and it's over £3 a litre. So that's $6 Australian for a litre of fuel. So they're going back to bikes. Can't buy enough electric cars. Can't turn that on fast enough. So they're back on a push bike.
And let's look at all those solar components that we're buying and the impact that it has on that. All of the stuff that we're installing and technology we're using is energy intensive to produce. Cost of energy goes up. The cost of those products goes up. The cost of shipping goes up, and all across the supply chain, even down to local couriers. I mean, we're seeing spikes, moving gear around Australia.
Fuel levy 25% now, yeah. And, of course, the rail line between Adelaide and WA got washed away again on Thursday. I don't know if that's a different section of track. There wasn't any more detail around it other than the rail line's closed again. So patching up that rail line, obviously not a great success. And we've got to invest a lot of money to make it flood-proof because it happens every year.
Yeah, it is happening at a regular rate, and I can't see that changing. Some manufacturers, Luke, do produce with renewable energy, and so you could actually say they have no impact to this. Those that have got massive solar arrays next to the PV module factory in China or on their inverter manufacturing plant in Europe. But the components they use might not. And so if a small part needs a whole lot of energy to create, then the cost is going to go up for everyone.
What about some of the small parts that may be sourcing their raw materials or may be produced in Ukraine and Russia?
Yeah, I think, Karl, you were saying aluminium or something along those lines?
Yeah, so 25% is the number that I find is the amount of aluminium or bauxite that's turned into aluminium in the Ukraine. They've got 4 large nuclear reactors. That's great base load, and those things need to run 24/7. And obviously they use spectacular amounts of energy. I can't see how those manufacturing plants can continue to operate during a war. They're a pretty good target, and you do a lot of damage by shutting them down. So if we shut down our aluminium smelter, we end up with a solid block of aluminium that has to be cut out, chiseled out. It's gruesome to bring them back online after they've had a power outage that's solidified it. I think that we might have a scenario where the world just gets 25% less aluminium for some time, and that drives the cost up. No getting past it.
So aluminium in a solar panel in the frame, you've got aluminium in racking, you've got aluminium heat sinks in inverters, some cable has aluminium in it. There's a few of your components that we've just ticked off there that could go up.
Yeah, it's quite a few. And obviously from an inverter manufacturer's perspective, there's not a huge amount of aluminium, but the main chassis inside a Fronius is aluminium, the heatsink's aluminium. From a panel perspective, it's the frames, it's the rail, it's the L-feet, it's all of those things. So whilst we think that those things are made in China, they're actually those big billets of aluminium. I think they're around 5 tons, a big round billet. They come out of the Ukraine, get exported to China, and then China turn them into the products that we see.
One of the things I was watching, and this is a slight tangent, last week was on Al Jazeera, and it was talking about Ukraine as a food bowl. Now, Ukraine exports a lot of wheat and corn and sunflower oil. They've got markets all around the world. And on Al Jazeera, they were speaking with someone from Egypt and someone from Lebanon. Now, the guy from Egypt was saying that in the Middle East and Africa, Egypt is the largest importer of the products, of the wheat particularly. And he was saying this is going to have a significant impact. So the prices spiked in wheat and those other products. And he said that it's going to move the poverty line over their general population. The Lebanese guy said, well, they're forecasting, if this is prolonged, that 85% of their population is going to come under the poverty line. And he said what they do in Lebanon is they fix the price of wheat, regardless of where the global market is. And the government has some fund that they pay the difference. So it's some sort of, welfare or subsidy. So it's affordable for everyone. But he said when the port blew up in Beirut, they lost their largest wheat silos. So they don't really have reserves and they're having to buy at higher prices. And he said, we're currently at risk of our fund that subsidises the wheat for the people living under the poverty line. Our fund is running out. So if this is prolonged, then it's going to have a huge impact on the country. Now, that's the reason I'm saying this is that's one snapshot from one part of the world and the flow-on effect of a prolonged war between Ukraine and Russia. What are the other things that are going to be impacted? We've discussed energy. It's likely to push up inflation and pricing. It's likely to push up interest rates. Bringing it back to the Australian solar industry, we're a fortunate country and we're doing quite well, but our industry volumes go hand in hand with consumer confidence.
Without a doubt. So that's an interesting one. So we've definitely seen an uptick in demand in the last week. It's been gradually moving up, but there's been a definite upswing in demand this week. And I think there's lots of information on the news for mums and dads to see. There is a global energy crisis. They can see it when they drive down the streets on the side of the road. Cost of energy's gone up. I'm sure lots of people are thinking about an electric car. I bit the bullet. I'm sure there's never a right time to order and buy an electric car, but I bit the bullet. I put in my order. Now it's a matter of hoping and praying that we're going to get them.
So congratulations, Karl. I think that's amazing. Battery on wheels, basically, and I'm sure that very soon you'll have the charger that allows you to plug it into your home and you'll be completely self-sufficient. It's probably out of the reach for a lot of Australians and a lot of homeowners who wouldn't be able to make that investment. And I'm wondering whether or not, batteries themselves, home batteries, your Tesla Powerwalls, your BYDs, your LGs and Power Plus and the like, they're all going to go up in price. They're getting more expensive along with everything else. But will mums and dads still, is that the industry that people should focus on? Is there sufficient consumer confidence or even consumer fear about energy price to drive spending on self-sufficiency in a home battery?
I think there is, and I also think that there's never been a better time in history to make the change from petrol to electric because all these supply shortages, we know that the used car market is particularly inflated, and someone who's got a 5-year-old car is likely able to offload that for $5 or $6 grand less than what they paid for it new 5 years ago. And that depreciation is typically more like $3,000 a year. So a car that was 30 grand 5 years ago should be worth about 15, and they're worth 25. So I think that's a good time. And I think we haven't seen the cost of electric cars jump up yet. So this may be the best time that we've, and other mums and dads, I'm sure they're doing the maths. They're sitting at the dinner table saying, hey, petrol cost me $130 to fill up. It was only $100 last week. It was on the news. Petrol has actually gone up 60% since Christmas. That's a lot.
Wow.
That's a lot.
And bringing it back to home batteries, so there is offsetting increase in energy costs, but also energy security.
Definitely. There's a probably irrational fear, but there's definitely fear drives sales of batteries without a doubt.
Yeah, almost paradoxically, it's consumer fear that drives the uptake of batteries, not consumer confidence.
And the fact that they're prepared to make that investment, I guess the other topic of conversation while we're talking about Ukraine, why they're hanging around and why they're fighting. I guess if all three of us lived in Ukraine, we'd be looking at our properties and our investments and our homes and saying, well, we're either going to walk away or we're going to do our darndest to try and keep it and fight till the bitter end. And I think that's what most people in Australia would choose to do. We'd choose to fight rather than walk away. And that's why we see them hanging on and going as well as they are.
Well, Karl, we were there 3 years ago. They have their own distinct culture and language, and it's pretty hard to see because when conflicts are very far detached from you, you can't really relate to the people and their lifestyle, and it's at arm's length. But when you get a culture that they're an educated people, like you said, they've bought their houses, they've bought their cars, they've got their lives, they've got their jobs, everything else. When all that comes to an end and you see the people streaming out of the country, not knowing if they're going to come back, and if they are, what they're coming back to, it really impacts people. And speaking around, obviously around the industry, it's we talk about industry, we talk about life, you build relationships with people. And between the floods and the war in Ukraine, I've found that there's probably more conversation centered around those things than our day-to-day solar panels and inverters.
Yeah, indeed. So I've been well and truly on the campaign trail the last, I'm always on the campaign trail, but I'm really pushing people to encourage their customers to put really as much PV on the roof as they can. Certainly, if the Chinese do manage to make that 1,000 gigawatts of production capacity of modules, I think Australia is now well behind. Last year we did 3.6 gig. January was half what it was last year. February, not much better than that, only a couple of hundred gigawatts up on the megawatts up on the January numbers. The industry is going to slide. I can't see how we're going to do 3.6 gig this year, and I think we should be doing more like 5 or 6. So there's a big gap as to what we should be putting in and what's actually happening.
Dougal and I had a conversation around this probably mid last year, Dougal. You would just sense check in where your distributors thought the market was going to be, how many gigawatts. And we both agreed that, we didn't foresee anything like the floods or anything else, but we both agreed that we thought it would either plateau or soften. And I think we're both talking a similar figure with our forecasts of where the market would go. I think it's fair to say it's probably a little bit lower than what we were forecasting too.
Oh, absolutely. I think the start to the year that we've seen, definitely we're not on track to reach what we were thinking we'd get for the year. At the moment, I think 2.5 would be optimistic, but it can change quickly. There's still a lot of solar farms to be built. There's a really good pipeline of commercial work to be done, and 1.2, 1.3 or 3 megawatt jobs, they add up pretty quickly into tens of megawatts that can significantly change the overall picture. And I know we're really talking the STC market, but Karl, I think you were talking LGCs as well, yeah, and your 5.7 or whatever number you were thinking. So there's sufficient pipeline there for it to happen. And we've got an election coming up as well, don't forget. There's a lot of talk that that's going to be a climate-faced election. They're going to fight on that battle lines. And if that happens and a Labor government wins, then you'd think they'd have to come through with some pretty serious policy to support the transition. And that could give the industry a really good shot in the arm for the second half of the year.
The numbers are looking promising in terms of people managing to sell larger systems. The numbers are still creeping up slowly. I did quite a bit of chatting with Matthew Wright, who's been on a previous episode about the sorts of numbers that we need to take all of our cars off the road. And it's at least double the energy that's on the grid now. So even if we manage to renewable what we've got, we really want to be thinking about taking Australia's cars off the road in 10 years. We need double the amount of energy and then some that we thought that we were going to need in order to hit our global promises of zero emissions by 2050. And I think the sooner we get on with it, the better.
Yeah, I agree entirely, Karl. Is the consumer vehicle that needs to come off the road. And I think we'll probably see travel dip again with working from home arrangements. If they can come back in even part-time, you can take a lot of cars off the road in the morning and afternoon peaks, but not all of them, obviously. You've then got our transport that needs to be electrified. We're still hauling stuff in trucks all over this country, several thousand kilometres in the back of a truck, burning diesel, and that's costing more and more and more. And I'm sure that the owners of the trucking fleets, the Lynn Foxes of this world, are looking at it going, this is silly for one initial investment plus a solar farm or multiple solar farms where I can recharge my fleet along the way, or even better, just change the rig to a fully charged one along the way and keep going. Then that's something we will likely see over the coming years.
It's happening in the US. You're seeing electric prime movers, and it's not just Tesla pushing that. There's some other companies doing the electric prime movers. And we're seeing even in Australia with Fortescue and Rio both buying electric trains. So coming back to what Karl was saying and Matthew Wright, it's a great thing that we're going to electric trains, we go to electric prime movers, and it's just about installing the PV to charge it and the extra energy production.
Yeah, what an opportunity to redeploy all those people that might lose their jobs in a coal mine to building solar farms.
Oh, look, even better if we start talking redeploying funds. Australia really is an economic superpower in the global stage in terms of our energy exports. We talked about the Sun Cable before. That's a spectacular opportunity for Australia, and I hope to see progress soon. That's spectacular. But we can be putting in, Twiggy's doing his renewable hydrogen. So my sister's a process engineer. They're doing feasibility studies for turning hydrogen into ammonia, exporting that, and whether they're actually going to burn that ammonia as is or convert it back into hydrogen at its destination. The sort of investments that are slated or actually happening now is quite impressive.
And you could likely repurpose that ammonia too. So they're talking about Russia being a massive exporter of fertilizers. Yep. And the difference, there's a 50% difference in yield. So the three key ones, I believe, are ammonia, potash, and urea. So they've already flagged urea shortages because that also goes into AdBlue. But maybe it's an opportunity to be self-sufficient with fertilizers as well. If someone like an Andrew Forrest or someone similar would say, right, in terms of security of our country and being self-sufficient, this is a big gap that we have. We're dependent on places like Russia. Let's repurpose some of that green ammonia to make fertilizer.
Look, I had no idea a month ago that you could turn hydrogen into fertilizer. That blew me away. And fertilizer is very expensive. Hydrogen's expensive. It will definitely slow down production on farms if fertilizer goes up even more. And obviously hydrogen's probably the most expensive way of getting your ammonia. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. There's talk on Landline about carbon farming, people sequestering carbon into the dirt by growing things and ploughing it back into the soil. Certainly most of Victorian soils are very high carbon contents anyway, talking about adding carbon to otherwise very crappy soils. And the only one that's going to make any money out of that scenario is the bean counters that are trying to assess how much carbon went into the ground. We don't think it's actually going to happen.
Yeah, sequestering carbon in the ground that way is fairly labour intensive, and you need to move at such a rate to offset what's coming out the other side so that it's almost impractical. A lot like carbon capture and storage and the Callide plant in Queensland, it's the pilot facility. They did the maths on it and they went, great, you've managed to capture some carbon from a coal-fired power station in Queensland. You then drove it all the way down to Victoria and then buried it in the ground in Victoria, and the carbon you burned, transporting it down here and burying it, was greater than what you just captured. Magic coal, I like to call it. It's people with investments that they're terrified of becoming absolutely worthless, clinging to them and putting in more and more layers of, no, it's good. See, it's still good. Give us your money.
I think that we'll see the flying Tesla before we see that actually working.
Yeah. Speaking about price increases, my sparrows are telling me that the distributors of Australia are selling solar modules below the cost of goods, which means they're losing money every time they sell a solar panel. I'm just astounded by this. If true, it makes no business sense whatsoever. And sustainability, the three principles, sustainable business is one of them. And for a sustainable industry, you need to have sustainable distribution. And at the moment, I'm terrified that distributors losing that amount of cash. It's going to be a lot harder for them in the future to absorb some of these other price rises. What are your boys' thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of pressure there. Certainly, we are selling stuff very close, if not with a bundle of something else, so that we can get our stock holdings down. So I think the whole industry really did step up when there was a possibility that we weren't going to be able to get any modules at all. Everyone put in a lot of big orders. The shipping was unreliable. What was 4 weeks, set your watch by it, turned into 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Don't know where it is. It's lost in transit. It's parked off Singapore, whatever. So we took the right steps to try and secure stock so that the industry wouldn't have to slow down, so that we could keep going. And it really didn't matter that much. We knew that the cost wasn't going to come down. So, we're into new money. But everyone had the same thought, and everyone managed to secure good stock. And there was a couple of manufacturers in particular that were located just by chance in areas that weren't affected as much by those energy shortages. And we ended up with a lot of stock in Australia. And I know we're definitely not alone. All the distributors that I speak to have got lots and lots of stock. That tells me that the industry slowed down a lot. We'd normally be out the other side of a large glut of stock within a couple of months, and we're still months and months away from that excess stock being removed. We still have bills to pay. I know that most big solar businesses get their panels out of China with Sinosure, whether that's 30, 60, 90 or 120 days. I've got no idea what people's particular circumstances are. Certainly the stock's been in the country long enough that we're having to pay for it, even though we still have it. And that's a big problem because we're a very, very capital-intensive business. So we all know that solar equipment's expensive, a couple of $100 a panel, and suppliers telling me that they've got hundreds of thousands of panels in stock. That's a lot of money that's sitting in warehouses and costing money to store.
Around September last year, the manufacturers and all of the industry media and all of the signs from the supply chain were saying there's potential shortages. So distributors all did the right thing, got in chunky orders to buffer the industry, as Karl said. The module pricing and shipping costs peaked in December. And since then, it's softened somewhat, but the stock all landed. There was a glut of panels in the market, and there's still demand for those panels, even if it's softened. But companies are there and they need to pay their bills within their terms. So it became a bit of an issue that the more desperate ones and those who are in a dire situation ended up at cost, below cost. And then the rest of the market follows because the fear goes through the other distributors and other people holding significant stock that I could be left holding this stock and we don't know where it's going to go. So there's a difference between those who could ride the storm somewhat and those who are absolutely desperate. The panel market over the last 3 months has been totally irrational with the pricing and with the margins that people are making. And what I see is desperation.
It does feel like desperation, and it's great for installers and it's great for consumers. They get to enjoy panel prices at stable levels or even cheaper than they were getting before, which will help them when consumer confidence is low. They're trying to win a sale, and if they can get product a little bit cheaper, it might just be more margin for them, or it might be the difference between a closed won, closed lost sale. Yeah,
look, I've said to a lot of customers, look, if you have sufficient cash, now is a really good time to put panels in your shed. They're not going to go down in price. We can take some of the pressure off distributors by putting it into your warehouse instead of ours. The problem is, particularly in Victoria with coronavirus, they've had to pay people for months and months when there hasn't been any work and they don't have any cash.
Yeah.
So the industry is a double whammy. It's not, well, at the moment, the farmers are on the upside. It's good season, good rain, good weather, good commodity prices. All of their stars have lined up. And unfortunately, we've got none lined up. All the stars are facing different directions.
Throw in a little bit of wet weather to stop you installing for a couple of weeks. And it can be pretty brutal.
I don't know that it's going to be a couple of weeks, though, Dougal. It's longer than that. So even people that haven't necessarily been affected directly by the flood, their level of confidence with the war and the election and all of this sort of stuff, it's all conspiring against us to not be able to make sales. Hence the thought to drive our customers into talking to customers about getting an electric car. It makes a big difference environmentally. It's a good time to do it, and it means that you can effectively sell a system that's twice the size. And the less number of customers we've got, or the more value we can get out of the customer. We clip the ticket for a heat pump, clip the ticket for an air conditioner, clip the ticket for a charge point for a car, clip the ticket for a battery. Can try and value add what little customers we've got and try and really convert them over entirely. Anyway, I think it's possible. We've just got to keep pushing hard.
Well, thanks, guys, for coming on. Dougal, Karl, it's been a really good chat.
It's always fun, and it's always great having an Energy Matters crew back together.
Indeed. Thanks for having me again, boys. It's been a lot of fun.
No worries. Cheers.
All right. Thanks for listening. click subscribe, share it around to anyone who might get benefit. Have a good one. Thanks.
Right.